Hello, I want to welcome you to our Coffee and Conversation group. My name is Sarah Carell. I'm the founder of The Power of Our Story, and we are a community where veterans, first responders, and all protectors can connect, share their experiences, and heal together. So today, I want to welcome our guest, Ryan Roberts. Ryan is the founder of The Journey Home. He's a United States Marine Corps veteran. He is redefining healing for veterans through community and purpose. And he's a former healthcare executive. So, after 20 years in healthcare leadership and a personal battle with the invisible wounds of war, Ryan saw the cracks in our system and knew that we needed more than symptom relief. We needed a revolution in how we understand healing. And that's why he founded The Journey Home, a coaching and community platform empowering veterans and their families to turn shame into strength, guilt into growth, and moral injury into meaning. Ryan writes, together, we're building a culture where trauma and moral injury are understood not as disorders, but as invitations to deeper wisdom. Post-war challenges are seen not as symptoms to manage, but as opportunities for collective growth. And veterans are recognized not as broken warriors needing repair, but as bearers of essential wisdom our world desperately needs. That's the reframe we need. And again, I was very drawn to Ryan's posts on LinkedIn because I just have not heard this arena of moral injury articulated as potently and as beautifully as Ryan has done it. So I am going to hand over this conversation for you to share your story, Ryan, and then we'll start this conversation afterward. But I just want to warmly, warmly welcome you here, Ryan. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate it, and I hope I can live up to those words.
So, Ryan, please introduce yourself, share your story with us, and why you are so passionate about moral injury.
Yeah, well, thank you, and thank you to everybody for being here. Truly appreciate the support, and as we're going to talk about today, community is it's the container in which all of the healing needs to occur for so many reasons. But we'll get to that part. But just a little bit about my background. So spoke to it a little bit in the introduction, but a little bit more informally. And as I move through this, since I asked Sarah beforehand, I'd like to keep it informal. There's a small group of us here. I may use some language that may be unfamiliar, and I just encourage anybody at any point to just ask me to pause and maybe clarify or provide a little bit of an example because language is something that I believe we've been lacking in the moral injury space. It's really just been based on pathology and disorder, and we need to work on the language quite a bit because our language, absolutely, the words we use, the tone we use, the way we engage in dialogue, it really does add the color to our world, and it really does dictate a lot of our experience. So if I use any language, I throw around any terms. I do my best to explain when I think there's something coming, but please stop me. Just speak up and I'll pause and we'll dig in to make sure you feel comfortable with it. But a little bit about me and how I got to the military, because when we talk about moral injury and values, I think it's important just to kind of set a little bit of context. But I grew up on the East Coast, not far outside of New York City. And after the events of 9/11, being just, living so close. Again, we were one of those towns where pretty much everybody in the town, their families, everybody worked in and around New York City, and a lot of them in and around the World Trade Center. It was a commuter town, so trains in and out. that type of a proximity. And just after those events, everybody here on this call is old enough to know what it felt like during those times, especially in those first 48 to 72 hours. And I grew up in a home that values were very, very important. Grew up in a Roman Catholic household of all. That came with its own trauma. We don't have the time for that today. But absolutely, values are tied to that as well. And while I may not have appreciated as much as a child, and as a teenager, absolutely, at this point, I can look in the rear view and say, and I can thank my parents for, while it could have been strict at times and challenging at times, that I was very informed around values and how I could and should use those, to relate to myself and to really to put those values into action as virtues, and do my best to just live in alignment with those. And one of those values growing up was to protect and care for those who didn't have the ability to do so for themselves, right? The idea of service and of charity, were something that was just deeply, deeply woven in since a child. I remember clearly moments, as early as kindergarten to first grade, where my dad would bring me along when he would, either do these activities to kind of feed the homeless or to get coats when winter was coming, just lots of small things that, again, as a kid, I didn't give a ton of attention to. But looking back now, I can see all of these just little events just piling up and starting to establish this value system of, they weren't just words on a piece of paper, they were actual actions. They were how we interacted with everyone around us. And again, that service and those values were instilled early. And that was one of those core values that I can definitely recall clearly over and over and over being kind of sewn into that fabric of who I was. And the events of 9/11 obviously deeply transgressed those values. And so I had graduated high school in 2000, 2001, 9/11 occurred. I was in my first semester of college. And I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was there just because I thought I was supposed to be doing something. And when the events happened and I had that deep guttural feeling to do something to be of service, the military sounded like the right thing to do. And I didn't grow up with a family of, there's no history of service in my family. I don't have this great lineage of folks who have served in the world wars in Vietnam. There was none of that I'm aware of. It was just this calling that I felt. And as it happened, I was in this, being a freshman in college, I was working in the mall at one of those pretzel stands. And this recruiter walks up, and if you've seen a Marine Corps recruiter in his dress uniform, I mean, he could sell you just about anything. And he sold me pretty quickly, and it didn't need much selling because I knew I was looking for something, some way to be of service. And after just a few conversations with him and some challenging conversations with my parents, decided to join the Marine Corps. And he convinced me quickly, and he convinced me not just to join the Marine Corps, but to join the infantry. And again, it wasn't much of a push. If I was going to do it, I wanted to do something, that was going to be put me in a position to do what I felt needed to be done, which again was to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves, and to protect the innocent at the end of the day. And fast forward, join the Marine Corps, do the boot camp on Parris Island, do School of Infantry there in North Carolina. And in January of 2003, and just to refresh memories, the war kicked off in Iraq in March of 2003, but we were loaded on ships after getting back from, our Christmas leave. They said, go enjoy your time with your family. Don't know when you're going to be back there again. Um, don't know if you're all going to come back and be able to go back there again. They're pretty frank about it. And January of 2003, we load on ships. We head over to Kuwait. We set up shop. March of 2003, the war kicks off. Not far in, March 23rd, 2003. most people aren't familiar with the Battle of An Nasiriyah, but I was a member of 1st Battalion, 2nd Marines. Usually, to jog people's memory, they can think back to the Iraq War early days. There was an Army private by the name of Jessica Lynch. She was part of a maintenance battalion, and their convoy got separated. Our unit, one of our strategic initiatives in country was to secure these two bridges that were going to move the friendly forces north towards Baghdad. But they were ahead of us. They got off of their convoy for some reason, and ended up headed into the city about 12 hours before we were supposed to head into the city and secure it. They didn't realize what they were coming into, but the Iraqi forces were ready. Again, these were key strategic bridges that were going to enable the United States and coalition forces to move north towards Baghdad. So they had basically stacked the city with everything they could possibly have. Numbers looking back, they say there were, something like 5,000 combatants in the city at that time. So they went into kind of well, we ended up in a hornet's nest because they stirred it up, but they went in ahead of us and they were hit really, really hard. Several of them were killed. Jessica was one of them that was captured. And with that occurring, that sped up our clock. So we had a plan, very well orchestrated. We were going to have all of these resources, air assets, ground assets to move into the city because we knew we were going to be going up against something. But with the timetable changing, we had to move into the city immediately. And we did so. We didn't stop, we didn't wait, and we moved in there to do our best to try to get to the folks who were still there on the ground. Um, and we went into a bit of a hornet's nest, to say the least. Looking back, I remember before going in the military watching Black Hawk Down and being like, wow, if this is what it's really like, that movie did a pretty good job of depicting some of the chaos of battle and what could potentially happen. Because we went into the city and it was like a movie scene. I mean, the rounds were flying, the RPGs were hitting our vehicles. The explosions everywhere, just it seems like chaos, but they train us so well that you're moving in there and it's as if time slows down and you're just doing your job. So if there's anything that the Marine Corps and the US military does well, it is probably preparing you to operate and move through that chaos with some very, very strange calmness and a bit of apathy. Um, but due to all of those compounding effects of us going in and just comms going down almost immediately, and there ended up being an instance where one of our companies got pinned down in one part of the city. They didn't realize Charlie Company, another element of 1st Battalion, 2nd Marines, had advanced to a certain point. They thought they were still behind, so they had called in um, our air assets when they did come online. And those air assets misidentified Charlie Company as potential enemy vehicles, and it resulted in the death of 13 Marines just fairly instantaneously. So it was an A-10 air asset. They're called to bust tanks, and they fired in on Charlie Company's AAVs, and it created some true devastation. And I was a member of Alpha Company. We were the ones who moved up to secure the location around where Charlie Company was hit. My job as a private 19-year-old private in the Marine Corps was to go into one of those two tracks and pull out whatever I could because we needed to send something back to the families. But the unfortunate aftermath of an A-10 hitting a vehicle is there's not much left. So I had to go into that vehicle and spare you the details, clean up and bring out what I could. And I just remember, in those moments, just it's as if time stopped and the world got a bit distorted because to walk into that reality and to visibly walk into that is something that, to this day, I can still feel it in my body. Just being completely disoriented and having a lack of understanding for what was going on in the moment. And I remember just clearly in my head thinking, well, I've witnessed the worst of what I could potentially witness. And unfortunately, that was not true. Um, that battle continued after that. It stayed kinetic for about 3 or 4 days. So kinetic meaning there was just active gunfights, active movement through the city for, I think the battle in total was about 7 days, but we had about 4 days of kinetic warfare. Um, about 24 hours after that incident, we had reached the strategic bridges probably about 12 hours before, but it was my fire team's job to man basically the checkpoint to that was between our forces, uh, the bridge being the strategic objective that we were there to protect, and then just basically the outskirts of the city. And at that point in time, and pretty much for most, honestly, most of the Iraq war, the combatants were not in uniform. There were some, absolutely, there were some, but it was you couldn't tell a civilian from a military asset at all. They would be dressed as a civilian, be moving around. Out from under their clothes would swing an AK, fire rounds. So that was just the reality of the environment. And they would move around in civilian vehicles, knowing that we would hesitate if they were in a civilian vehicle to engage. And again, my team was at the security checkpoint, and because again, things are still as clear as day to me now. Um, an orange and white taxi cab is approaching the checkpoint. To just give you an understanding, we had 3 layers of Constantine wire, that sharp razor wire running across the road, probably about, I don't know, probably about 10 or 15 meters in between each of those rows. And that's basically just a reminder to anybody approaching, like, you're not supposed to cross this point. You don't understand English, but you can understand what that means. Um, and an orange and white taxi cab rolls up real slowly, sees the Constantine wire, backs up. We think they're going to just turn around and drive away. They were, maybe they didn't understand that we were in that particular area. But what they did was they sped up and they started to drive through, and they drove through the first layer. They drove by the time they got to the second layer. Our rules of engagement were to open up on that vehicle and disable it before it would get to where the friendly forces were, and we did. And that vehicle kind of slowed to a stop. And then it was our job to kind of get up from our location and secure that vehicle, secure anything in there. And we move up to the vehicle. We secure the two front, the driver and the passenger seat first. And as we open the door, we see two military age males, and they've got weapons in the vehicle. So we thought, I remember in my head just thinking, okay, thank God it was a good stop. And then my job was to kind of get the back right behind the driver's side door, but the back passenger door. And as I open that door, look in, and there's two children on the floor, and the children were gravely wounded. The entire vehicle had been kind of chewed up because it wasn't just our squad and us trying to stop the vehicles. There was a host of other forces as well, on 50 caliber machine guns and the Mark 203 grenade launchers. So the vehicle was basically destroyed. And they had children in there. I mean, I'm making an assumption, right? But it was intentional psychological warfare. Two military age males with weapons in the front seat. They understand American forces well enough to know that that right there was going to be something truly devastating. And obviously for me, I'm here now having a talk about moral injury. It was incredibly devastating for me. In the moment, again, we're trained. So this isn't in the moment where I'm processing all of this terror and grief and all. In the moment, I'm just in the moment, and I pick the little boy up. Someone else in my squad picks the little girl up on the other side, and we each rush to different medevac vehicles. And We do what we're supposed to do. We start to apply first aid. I'm in the back of what's called an AAV, or a large tracked vehicle, and we're basically racing to the medical evacuation checkpoint because based on their wounds, there was nothing that I could do to preserve life other than just the basic battlefield dressings that I could apply and the pressure I could apply. And I remember giving chest compressions and every life-saving thing that I knew I was doing in the moment. But it was in retrospect, I can look back and realize that what I thought was the boy still breathing as I was trying to give first aid was just agonal breathing, which is just your body's response once you've actually passed. Um, and, I just remember, going in my mind, being alone in the back of this vehicle. I mean, as I'm explaining this to you, I can still hear the vehicle. I can still smell the diesel smoke and the spent ammunition. It's a very, very surreal thing that I can still remember the sounds and the feel and the smell of being in that vehicle and doing whatever I could to save this boy's life, to realize that there was nothing that I could do. And by the time we got to the checkpoint, as I was saying, he had agonal breathing, so I turned him over to the medical staff, and they immediately realized the situation, and yeah, they were like, "You did the best you could," and they sent me back into the vehicle and right back to the front lines. Um, and I remember being in the back of that vehicle then alone without the boy and just like looking at myself and everything just covered in blood. And just the thoughts immediately start racing through my head, you know, and it was all, again, why I shared in the beginning about the core values. It was all going back to that. You joined to do this. You joined to protect the innocent, right? So my core value was that. And the choice I made in the moment, correct, incorrect, it was all of the information I had. And it was the right choice at the time, but I violated that core value. Not just did I violate that core value with anything, it was at the expense of the life of two children. And that is the core difference between post-traumatic stress being a fear-based response to that and that core transgression of values. And it was then in that moment that I can think back and say that was the initial, actually, probably 24 hours beforehand, that initial event was probably a crack in that foundation of values. Because again, I couldn't do anything to protect those that were there with me, right? And when we're there and when we're in the moment and when we're in war, everybody else goes away except for the people to your left and your right. And to not be able to be there to protect them, to, right, you just go down that list of what could I have done? I should have done more. I should have. And that was probably the initial crack in that foundation of values. But then the next day that occurs. And I wish I could tell you, and I'm done explaining the graphics of it. I think we get the depth at which there can be this spiritual and psychological wounding that occurs to our military. But that was not the last event that I can look back and say that was another crack in the foundation. That was another crack in the foundation. And I'm going to get to why I'm calling it a foundation because it matters, and I think it does a lot to kind of explain um, the events and the injury, and then how those things can. The word I use is cascade over time, but I think it goes to just speak to um, the parts of war and the parts of combat that it's not surprising why somebody doesn't want to come back and share that type of a story. It took me a long time to be able to just even share glimpses of that to even my most trusted people. And but I eventually got to the point where, sharing that, um, it's every time it's a little bit healing, right? And it's not to share the graphic nature of it. That's just to share with everybody today to give a glimpse of, well, and we're going to get into it more, but how moral injury differs from post-traumatic stress and the impact that it has on us and the people around us. Um, but I think I've said enough around that. Yeah. Fast forward a little bit. I have subsequent follow-up deployments. Next ones are a bit different, not as kinetic. It's not the invasion of Iraq, but subsequent deployment, lose 24 guys in my unit. So this was just a theme of just traumatic loss, right? But I would say nothing that kind of gets to the level of moral injury that we're talking about. Those subsequent deployments and the things that would happen were much more of I would say along the lines of just that classic post-traumatic stress. But needless to say, just experience after experience after experience. And um, I was in it for 4 years, and I am close with a lot of people in this community who were 20 years, right? This was their life, and they would come back and they would just recycle deployment after deployment after deployment. But I came home in 2006, and that's where my journey to try to piece all this back together and make sense of it began. Like everyone else, came back, and I knew something was wrong, right, immediately. Um, but I go to a system that quickly wants to just diagnose it and to move on. Just, we know what it is. We're going to classify it as this. We're going to give you the medication. We're going to do the talk therapy, and we're going to move on. And it's just this vicious cycle. But it was a little bit different for me because I came back and I was not only going through this system, I was also somebody who came back, and part of my way of dealing with not wanting to look at it and not wanting to deal with it was staying very, very busy. And it didn't look like a maladaptive behavior, right? Some people turn to drinking, some people turn to other things. I turned to just staying extremely busy and being a high performer to try to fill some gap in me that I was never able to fill. But I did it by just staying busy. So I came back, I went back to school immediately, ended up spending nearly 20 years working in healthcare, everything from the front lines to being a senior executive overseeing very, very large. By the time I was done, I was overseeing about almost half, yeah, $500 million, 500 employees, 21 clinical sites. So got a full sense of the entire healthcare system from primary care to cancer care to surgical care and many, many other disciplines. But it gave me a front row seat to see all of the gaps that existed in the system. Um, all of these opportunities to hear a person's story, veteran or not, and just how the Western system is just trained to kind of scrape through the story as quickly as they can to find the symptomology that's bothering you, to quickly put a band-aid on it and to move on. And just this ongoing process of never really getting to the root of what's wrong with people, and just quickly moving to a point where we've got it under control, right? Just this constant game of whack-a-mole with symptoms. But that compounded with my own journey of constantly just going and looking for answers and being offered a pill or being offered another talk therapy session. Um, and we'll get into it a little bit, but some of the things that we use for just, those evidence-based gold standard PTSD treatments can actually be more harmful than good for the overall wellness of the veteran with moral injury, but absolutely for moral injury specifically. But before I go too far, I want to just quickly, if it's not clear, I mean, based on this room, I think we're pretty clear, but the difference between post-traumatic stress and moral injury. Post-traumatic stress kind of being that fear-based trauma. You have this big exposure, it's the IED, it's the being in combat. These are just things that to our nervous system are just completely dysregulating. And the more time that we spent in that dysregulated state, the harder it is for us to kind of get back to baseline and to normal when we return home. Um, So PTSD is very much that fear-based thing. It's about hyperarousal, it's flashbacks, it's avoidance. But there are, whether they work great or not, that's debatable. Depends on who you ask. I saw recent research saying how there are not a ton of people actually staying even in these evidence-based gold standard therapies. But there are pathways. There is a language around post-traumatic stress. There is an understanding. You've got post-traumatic growth, right? So they have ways to kind of start to navigate your way back home. But with moral injury, as I was explaining, that you have the core value, then you have this event that I made the right decision. And at the same time, that decision resulted in that fracturing of my core value system. What happens is you have this cascading effect. It starts with primary, the potentially moral injurious event, right? Those are those events that basically say there was an opportunity for moral injury to occur here in the moment. Actually, if I can, it might actually help if I bring up a graphic. So let me see if I can share. Okay.
I've got a question, Ryan.
Please,
I just want to I don't want to interrupt you, but I think it's very important to um, to understand what you say. Is it okay when I ask that
please,
question?
please.
Okay. What I get is that it was a breakdown with your deepest core beliefs, what you had when you experienced the death of the two children.
Hmm.
What I get is that you went to the war for protecting the innocent. That is what this is what you said, and this
Hmm.
resonates very deeply with me. I think that is very important to understand. That is a deep motivation. And the war situation shows you the exactly contrary of this. You killed, or not you, you killed, I did not get that fully, but the innocent died
Hmm.
in your hands. And this is, I think, the most important moment you experience during this situation. And this is what I want to point out, that this is so deep, and that is the most important thing here. And I think it's very important to think about that, what that means.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. And that's my hope in kind of bringing up this image. I hope it's not too complex for folks. But what I'd love for you to look at is on the left side, you see the cascade. So this PMIE, this is a potentially moral injurious event, right? So that's just the opportunity for a moral injury to occur. And the way that the cascade works is you have the instance. The first thing that I recognized going back was there was this deep transgression of values. And values you can just define as what you deem to be most important in the world, right? Your values are how you relate to yourself, how you relate to the world around you, and how you move about the world, right? When you're in alignment with your values, you're not much resistance with the world. Things are good. Things aren't as stressful. When you're out of alignment, we all know that internal feeling when we know the right thing and we don't do the right thing. That's when we're out of alignment with our values. But what happens with moral injury is you get such a crack to the foundation of who you are, which is your core values system, that what I'm defining as the scaffolding that makes up your identity, being meaning, purpose, connection, those things all build off of values. So when you have a crack in the foundation of values, that supporting scaffolding, that is your identity, starts to erode and starts to collapse. Now, depending on how severe that moral injury was, right? And there's a lot of things that, again, it's not trying to stratify to say one was worse than another. It's not a game of comparison, but there is a difference when you perpetrate and if and a moral injury occurs, or you have this instance of betrayal, or you have this instance of you could have done something and you didn't, right? These are all different instances of ways in which moral injury can occur. But you have this crack in the foundation, and then that scaffolding starts to erode. So you can see how it moves from the event to the values to your meaning, right? So you, at that point, you no longer know what's important to you. You thought you were this person who had these core values, and you no longer have them. Without those values, prescribing meaning to the event that occurred or any event in my life becomes very, very hard because that piece that would guide me is no longer in place. So when there's no values, no meaning, there can't be purpose, right? So you can see this effect that starts to accumulate and to build and really cascade or erode are the words that I use. But this basic architecture that makes up who you are and how you relate to yourself and the world around you is slowly falling apart over time. Now, how the pieces that either speed that up or slow that down, those are things that I'm very interested in identifying. And I think we're getting there. We're seeing things like grief and shame and guilt and moral outrage. And there's lots of accumulated material that happen that if we don't process and move through, this cascading process will not stop. Right. So if we think about, even just pause for a moment and think about what conditions are generally present when someone gets to the point of suicide, right? Life has no meaning. You have no purpose. You don't know who you are. You have incredible shame and self-condemnation, and then you isolate. This moral injury is the recipe for suicide. That's why when we talk about all of these hundreds of millions of dollars spent year after year after year, I don't think it's we're getting the I don't think it's that we're getting the wrong therapies in line. I think we've got the wrong wound. I think we've got the wrong wound. So that's what I think that's part of what I'm pointing to. But my definition and what I'm describing here as far as what moral injury does and how the identity starts to kind of fall apart into erode, it's very different from what we've seen traditionally in the moral injury space. Um, what we understand to date from kind of I would say the big names in the space. And again, it's not generated on lived experience. It's and this is not taking away from the research efforts. I actually think the folks who have been putting research forward are getting it right so far. But what we've lacked is this lived experience component to say, well, I can actually explain to you the process that happens once the event to get to the point of this shame and this guilt. Um, but it's just this is kind of filling in the picture of what was missing, and I why this is important. And again, I'll pause here in a moment and open up for questions because I think understanding this piece is important. Um, this moves away from being a pathology to being a it is a process that occurs, right? So it's not again, it's just it is not in the same sense a wound, right? That's why we say a spiritual wound, a soul wound, because you can take spirituality and people often relate it, they think religion right away and they kind of put it in that bucket. But spirituality at the end of the day is just the non-material, right? Things like values, purpose, meaning, those are non-material aspects of being a human being and living in this world and experiencing this world. So it is kind of a wound to those immaterial aspects. So that's where I think we can definitely call it a spiritual or a soul wound, because it definitely impacts our identity, who we are, and how we navigate the world. But my thought is that if we can understand the process of how we get from an event and an injury to the point where we get to suicidality, well, then there are definitely markers to get where people are at and to intervene. But not only that, if we understand how it collapses, we know how to rebuild it. So what you'll see in the middle are these five conditions that as I went back and mapped my journey, And as I've guided people through their journey, these are these core thematic buckets of basically the steps or the processes that help people rebuild that cascade to get back to putting their values back in place, to putting meaning back in place and purpose back in place. Um, Let me pause before kind of going into any more of this. And I just want what I want to maybe drive home with kind of this this cascading process that appears to be occurring is that there's just this paradox that seems to keep veterans stuck, right? It was part of my story. I think it was part of many others. We spoke about it in the beginning, the kind of the lack of language, the lack of a framework. But as that deterioration process occurs, right, you get to this point that without connection, the ability to make meaning is not there. Without the ability to make meaning, purpose discovery is nearly impossible. Without purpose, identity reconstruction is nearly impossible. You know, we hear all the time, I don't recognize myself. I don't know who I am. And people can, it's pretty easy to quickly pathologize that and put that into a clinical bucket. But it takes people, and this is just a key point, it takes people who I believe have metabolized their own wounds to be able to engage with folks when it comes to this work that really, absolutely, I think clinical care needs to be part of the conversation. Did it help me to stabilize my nervous system to be able to do some of this work? Absolutely. Like without a doubt. I worked in the system. I saw value. I didn't look around and see the world falling apart, but I saw opportunity for clinicians to open up more, but they didn't have the language. They didn't have the tools. They weren't taught to search for these ontological wounds at the end of the day, right? The language wasn't even there, right? So if you don't know what you're looking for, how are you going to find it? Right. So I think a critical part of this and what I'm trying to do with some of these frameworks is not to call out the clinical, my clinical colleagues and counterparts, because I know they want well for us as well. Right. A lot of the folks in the VA system and otherwise, they feel like they have their hands tied. They're doing the best with what they have, and just the opportunity isn't there. So creating these models and creating these frameworks, yes, it was for me, right, to get through my journey, and yes, it's to help the next one in line, but it's also, I hope to give a bit of framework and language for clinicians to be able to have deeper, more meaningful conversations. And while we don't have time for it today, if people in the room are interested, I put together a lot of assets for clinicians, just to start to help them maybe even reinterpret language that veterans are using in the moment, to say, is what they're communicating, is that grief wearing a mask, right? Is that shame and it's just coming across as rage? It takes a certain ear. And again, that's why I think having metabolized their own wounds, that idea of a wounded healer, somebody who's gone through the process, healed, and is now turning around, giving back, just of critical importance. But now going through that kind of, those parts of restoring and reestablishing coherence and congruence, um, those are pieces that's kind of, once you've understood that, okay, this is moral injury, this is an ontological wound, this is a fractured ability to make meaning. What we need to start doing is working on these first two buckets, which is reestablishing a worldview that can make moral sense of what happened. The challenge here, the challenge here that I've found in my own journey and working with others, is that it's there's not a way for me to go back to that example that I provided you and say there is clear, it's easy for me to make meaning. What I have to be able to do now and for the rest of my life is carry that paradox of, I made the right choice and I violated my values. I made the right choice. I probably saved lives and I cost the lives of two children. Both of those things are true. And it takes this level of cognitive flexibility to be able to carry that. And again, that's another thing where I think a wounded healer, I'm using the language of an elder, but somebody who gets it, who can kind of come back and can carry that for that veteran until they're ready to carry it for themselves. Right. So a lot of the work that I do when we're talking about walking back from moral injury is reestablishing that coherence. We need to get a point where they have the cognitive flexibility and the ability to carry paradox that a worldview can start to make sense. Because if not, you're moving through a world where it's completely disorienting, right? When that identity is collapsed and the meaning and the purpose aren't there. Um, it's the way I describe it to people, it almost feels robotic, right? I look around the room and I'm taking cues from people on what emotion I'm supposed to be expressing in the moment because I don't know how to connect to the world that's right here in front of me. I'm taking cues, right? So those are things that our veterans are going through, right? When I share that with veterans, they're like, oh my God, me too, all the time, right? But those are things that like we don't have that social permission to talk about unless somebody is going to kind of come into the room and open that up for us. But reestablishing that coherence is so critical. And then we move to that what I'm calling congruence, right? So if you have the worldview, now how do I start to live in that paradigm? How do I live in that worldview? So we have to go back to our value system, that value system that was fractured, and we have to make sense of it. And we have to start piecing it together. We have to start putting those values into place that matter. And not just, again, these aren't just words. If they're truly at our core what matter most to us, then we have to be able to then act upon those values as virtues, right? So when we get back and we say, I'm going to put these values back in place, I'm not just putting words back into my lexicon. I'm actually looking at my existence and saying, am I living in alignment with those values? Where am I not, and how can I? So it's this process of getting these veterans back to a point where the worldview is stable and they're starting to interact with that core value system again, and they're starting to act in alignment with those. This next piece of self-forgiveness is something that just comes with time. All of these things, healing, I don't believe that I've ever healed anybody at any point in time. What I focus on, what I work on, and what I encourage is for us to create the conditions for healing to emerge, right? So we're basically in charge of cultivating that process. So when we focus on the conditions and we put the person in the right place with coherence and congruence and start to talk about model, and there are exercises absolutely that can aid in that process of self-forgiveness. But it's something that just takes time and it takes patience. But again, it's just another critical element of reintegrating after that soul wound. And this tends to happen when we talk about conditions. Community is the container in which all of it occurs. And veterans at different points in their journey are always asking, like, they're starting to feel better and they want to be able to help the next person in line. And sometimes we've got to put the brakes on because they're still in this process. And I'm probably still in this process in some way, shape, or form as well, even after 2 decades. But what they can start to do is just be a witness to others because we don't have the time and we didn't get to yet a lot about the shame and guilt that comes with moral injury. But guilt being that I did something wrong, I acted against my values. Shame being I am what is wrong. That's when guilt transforms into shame, and shame starts to weave itself with your identity. And over time, it gets to a point where shame can overtake your identity. And again, that gets back to the identity piece where I don't know who I am anymore. I don't recognize the person in the mirror. These are all signs telling us that shame has started to fuse with identity. And, potentially this process has kind of taken place. But community witnessing, the power that comes with not trying to look at this as a problem to solve, this is just an experience, right? This is an experience that somebody's still not completed that journey back from. And for us as veterans and even non-veterans to just sit around and help carry that weight, to carry that paradox. That's something we used to do as a society that we don't do well anymore. But that witnessing piece is just, it's crucial, it's critical. And the amount of healing that just comes from with being with somebody, not trying to change or fix them, can't speak to the power of that enough. And then purpose and belonging. right? We eventually get to the point where we've moved through a lot of this, where we get to the point where we can say, healing is not me getting back to a pre-injured state. That wounds to wisdom, that is a translation of these had meaning. There's a reason why I went through everything I did. Now, obviously, it's perspective, right? But I can look at it and say that there was so much meaning and purpose in all of it. It takes me being a certain place with a lot of these precursors back kind of in my structure to look at that and say, I get it. It makes sense in the rear view. It didn't make sense out of the windshield, but I get it now. And I'm not just reconnecting with an identity of the past. I'm bringing all of it forward, and I'm evolving my identity as I go forward, right? And when you start to get those, the reason to live comes back, and um, we've started to create a really, really solid foundation. Um, and then metabolizing, right? So what I've shared a lot of is the language, the process. These things are conceptual. Um, that's part of the healing process. But then there's the embodied part of it, right? These things all carry energy. So in our process, we put a lot of different things from ritual and ceremony to just basic um, practices, right? Things like somatic work and even things like meditation and breath work, all of these things to move it from a conceptual understanding to an embodied understanding, because that's truly when it moves from being knowledge to being wisdom, right? When you start to embody it and you start to move through it, and it's just a piece of who you are, your entire perspective around yourself and the world around you it shifts and it changes. So that's what's kind of brought home on the right-hand side when you've got stability in those five domains, and then you've got the integrative process of coming back to ritual, ceremony, a community container, and again, moving the energy through the body, processing grief, processing shame. Again, these don't just live in the mind, they live in the body. This is also true and proven in science, I think, and from a lived experience. If all you work on is the conceptual, which much of traditional therapy focuses on, you're only going to get so far. You've got to be able to move it through the body as well. And I believe that's truly when we're able to cross home, right? So that's when that conceptual self and the embodied self come back, right? They merge. And really that's creating the ground for that soul wound to close, right? And when it comes to moral injury, that healing is integration. It is reintegration. It is getting to a point of wholeness. So that's why I speak to it much, much more as a process than anything else. We've got to move away from pathologizing this, because it's keeping people isolated, and it's keeping people from sharing and talking and doing the work that needs to be done. But I believe we're moving to a point where now we have an understanding of how moral injury erodes over time, how we can build it back up over time, in a thoughtful community container, and how we can truly bring our veterans home at the end of the day. And that's where the journey home kind of gets that's where the name comes from, because this has truly been a 2 decade journey of myself coming home to wholeness and to community. So I think we can end there and open it up to conversation.
Ryan, I just again want to thank you so much for coming on. This is so powerful how you
Yeah.
can articulate something that has been so incredibly hard for people to have the language for. I think even myself hearing hundreds of stories, one of the most painful things that I have felt is recognizing that we're falling short in being able to have the language to talk about
Mm.
this, to be able to give others the language to articulate their own story and moral injury. And although it's been really great in community because it has helped a lot to be in community, but again, the gift that you bring forward through this really tough, hard story is gold. It's
Well,
just
thank you.
it
Thank
is
you.
gold. Yeah. Um, so again, just such a heartfelt thank you for being so brave and courageous and really taking everything that you have gone through to really help other people. I do want to open it up. We do have a lot of regulars now on our group, and I think this conversation is so important that I just want to ask people, if you don't want to be recorded, just turn off your camera or maybe write in the chat to pause, because we have very seasoned people here who are going to ask really great, important questions. And the conversation is just going to even go deeper right now. So, can I ask you to do that? Can we just have people just turn off your camera if you don't want to be recorded? And then I'm going to have a different presentation set up so that we can further this conversation. Okay, so again, thank you so much. And I am going to go now to Scott. Welcome, Scott. Good to see you.
Hey, Sarah, thank you so much for having Ryan on today. This is a great topic. Fantastic presentation, Ryan.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for being here and thank you for the work you're doing. Simplify, brother.
Wonderful.
I came on a little bit late. I had some other stuff going on and thankfully remembered that this was happening today. So I
Hmm.
jumped on just to share a little bit of background. I'm a retired Marine. I was a major when things happened with 9/11. I was with 15th MUSOC
Hmm.
on the ground. We came up on your back end and we helped secure the portion of Anazaria. Uh, we also were part of the rescue of Jessica. The MUSOC played a part in that
Yeah.
as well. And my unit also, we wound up uh, providing some of our we didn't have anything but we didn't have body bags, but we had Marines
Mm.
that stepped up automatically and volunteered their sleeping bags, to go to help with what you mentioned,
Mm.
with the AAVs and the Marines that were killed. Yeah, that was a tough time. I mean, I remember that like it was yesterday, you know.
I do too. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I can imagine. Now you had a lot more up close and personal with that than I did. I mean, I remember being in the operations center, and it was like holy smokes.
Yeah.
But so anyhow, I just wanted to share that. Thank you for your service and for
Yes,
all that
sir.
you did. And when you think about you or anyone else that was put
Mm.
in a situation like that, I think you have to remember intent, right?
Mm.
What was my intent when I raised my hand, and what was my intent when I was on the ground? And I think that means a lot. You
Yeah.
didn't go there looking for what happened, and what happened was beyond your realm of even knowing, right? So it just is a casualty of war, and it's horrible. And I know you know this, right? I mean,
Yeah.
war
Yeah.
is exactly that. It's chaotic. Things happen that are out of your control. Things happen that you would just never imagine, and those are circumstances that plague everybody
Hmm.
that are involved in these situations. So, yeah, I think that maybe helps towards healing too, is just trying to, if you can break those things out, right, and say, well, it's different. If I went in there guns blazing and I was just, throwing caution to the wind and I don't care about, how we're supposed to be engaging, the
Mm.
rules of engagement, you know, those are all things that in some minds, or maybe that's just, well, that's easy. Anyone can think of that. Well, but I think it matters when you're reflecting, right? If you've done everything in your power and you've aligned with what you believe in your
Hmm.
values, and that says a lot about you. That guilt is tremendous, right? And that's
It
gonna
is.
that's gonna that's gonna try to find all kinds of fissures and cracks to come in at your soul. Uh,
Mm.
and there's a little bit there's deceit with that too, right? Because it starts telling a different story than maybe what happened, and so it's easy to fall prey to that, and then go down that cascade that you refer to. And I love that slide. In fact, I took a picture of that slide because I think I think it's of a lot of value. And uh, so Barry, who's on this call as well, him and I, we have a podcast. under the Power of Our Story umbrella, with Sarah here. And I'm sure that Barry's going to shake his head. I think you would be tremendous to, come on that podcast, and maybe we can go in and do a little more deep dive on some of the things that you'd want to speak to. So I want to invite you here as we're on this event, and I sent you a LinkedIn request,
Okay.
invitation connect, and I'm sure we can talk about this offline to see, when you're available, if you'd like to come in and we can do more of this. So,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. Yeah.
thank
No,
you
I'd be
again.
honored. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, I'm so glad I was here today. This makes so much sense. Thank you again.
Yes, sir. Well, thank you very much. And yeah, it's wonderful to know to have the live connection as well. So I did you may know do you know Dr. Bob Kaufman, Robert Kaufman? He was attached to he was the I guess kind of the mental health expert they sent in after the events in Al Nazariya, but he and I connected almost 20 years later in kind of a conversation like this where I was giving a presentation. And we made the connection, but he's kind of been a big name in the space since. So I don't know if you happen to know him, but it hit both of our stories. We're now both kind of out on the circuit talking about moral injury and specifically to Nazaria. So it's good to have another person who was there on the ground with us.
Yeah, his name sounds familiar. I'd have to look it up. I mean, if I saw his face, I'm so much better
Yeah,
with
yeah,
faces than I am with
sure.
names.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah.
and again, but it's been a while. It's hard to, you know, I sailed off with the Mew in February of
Mm.
2003, heading that way, right? And
Hmm.
it's hard to
Hmm.
believe that it's going to be, what, 23 years, I think, right?
That's right.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
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 But yeah, you're,
Yeah.
you're looking good, by the way.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
Hey,
Yeah, I
I've,
guess
I've
I
been I've been Scott for 13 years, so
Uh, I think the,
yeah,
the the
all
only
good
thing
though.
I would maybe share to what you said, and yes, I do believe there's a tremendous amount of value in um reaching the point where you can look back and say, intent, was it there, was it not? I th- well, maybe I'll speak from experience just personally, and then also share from what I've recognized in working with a lot of folks through this is with it being this meaning making, I often call it like an ontological wound, right? It's how we understand the world. It escapes logic, right? Because in my head, I could say my intent was not there, but that's only kind of healing the conceptual aspect of it. So yeah, for sure, it's important where we've got to maybe continue to go deeper with people is moving past that psychological piece, past that logical part of the mind to actually into the identity piece of it, where we can restore the values and we can restore all of those other pieces that I was alluding to. Because the logic piece is what traditional CBT, CPT, they focused on distorted logic or distorted thinking. But with moral injury, the thinking's actually right. Like what you said, what you're feeling, shame, guilt, those are good signs. But what we do in Western medicine is we find uncomfortable signs and symptoms and we shut them off. It's like pulling the batteries out of your smoke alarm, thinking it's going to put your fire out. Like the last thing you want to do is not pay attention to those symptoms when they come up. Like they're pointing towards something. And the challenge I believe we have is much of Western medicine tries to quiet them and tries to get those to go away, like rumination. What do they try to do? They attack it. They want you to stop having rumination. Well, yeah, I want to stop ruminating too. Well, why am I ruminating? Well, because there's a gap in meaning. Until I can recognize that there's a gap in meaning that I have to fill, I'm always going to ruminate. So I don't need a medication. I need to sit with it. I need to move through it. So yeah, just everything you said, and we need to continue that conversation to go beyond just the conceptual to get to the embodied lived experience of it.
That's excellent. Very, very
I
well
hope that
said.
makes sense.
Absolutely. No, that it makes perfect sense. No, I
Yeah,
couldn't agree more. Yeah, thank you for that.
you're welcome.
Like you need a resolution to that ruminating. You need some
Yeah.
kind of, yeah,
Yeah.
this is so good. This is so
Yeah.
good. I'm glad you're here, Scott. I'm so glad you're here. Can't see it on my end when people pop on when I have a screen shared. So it's good to see you. Glad you're here. And then Barry, good to see you. What's
Yeah,
up?
Ryan, thanks, my friend. I mean, thank you for sharing just the fire of your story. And I'm also grateful that you took it and from those wounds come what you've done. And really that map and what you do is in short supply in a world that
Mm,
is causing more problems than solutions. I think there's a commonality between people with moral injuries and PTS. And because if you think about it, I'll give an example. A vet came to see me. He was an Afghani boy. And I said to him, had you seen somebody? And he went, yep. And I said, so what happened? And he didn't have a moral injury. It was
mm,
combat related. He said, I walked
mm,
into the room and I sat down, clearly facing the door. The
mm,
therapist said, that's my chair, you need to move. So he got up and he walked out and he didn't come back. Now,
yeah.
increasingly, and the disparagement I have with my own kind of tribe is that we training technicians of the soul.
Mm,
And they disguise their modalities in a kind of pretty silver foil, which they called gold star evidence-based approaches. And it doesn't generally move beyond the story or the thinking. And it's a disembodied presence, or as
mhm,
Shauna Springer would say, they the doctors with the
mhm,
certificates on, not the docs. And I
mhm,
think within that space, whether you're coming in with a moral injury or PTS, there is also a deep wounding. There's a moral injury inherent in that space because it's already set up to fail you. It's
mhm,
set up to not be heard, not be met, either by the modality or the compassionate presence of the human being facing you. And one who's also informed with the language. So, I write that for clinicians, you need to earn the right to enter the room, not the other way around.
mm,
You need to leave your ego at the door and take your certificates off the wall and ask permission as to whether they feel you have a right to join their tribe into healing.
yeah.
Um,
So well said.
the second thing I've learned is that in the tension between the opposites, and I mean, I've seen this as I sat with the guys and I self-reflected on my war, are the tensions of I did my best, but I wasn't good enough. And
Hmm.
and that goes right down from average guys on the ground to tier one operators. I've heard them say that.
Hmm.
Um, I love my wife, but I don't have a problem killing. I
Hmm.
feel deeply, but sometimes I feel as if my heart is completely still. And I know that in the gift of the opposites, and in the discomfort of it lies our greatest gift, because there's no
Mm,
potential healing at a body and a soul level without the fire of the tension. It's the
mm,
the comfort within the discomfort.
yes. Yes.
Um, and I think there is that territory of the healing modality and the training of people that struggle to understand the power of interpersonal presence and love
Hmm.
versus modalities and a handful of evidence-based modalities. And that territory is another operational zone that needs to be changed. Now, I think in terms of what you're doing, it'll ripple out. You kind of pluck one leaf off the forest at a time till it wakes up one day and it goes, oops, we've changed.
Yeah.
Um, I also found, and this is for you, Sabina, I was very privileged to take 16-year-old students on for 5 years on trips through the concentration camps and in Poland. And it was the most profound experience because in witnessing myself and the kids sitting in this is one place, I think it's Majdanek, but it's a concrete chamber. And sitting in that dark room where every scrape just went chick, 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 and echoed around. And I could feel the souls of people move through that room. And sitting in that tension and helping kids to not just see the story, but also to feel it with their hearts and to come away with what I called it's a flame of compassion and love both for themselves and others, and to come out with a set of values that would guide them forward. So I think to finish off, what you're doing is not just ground changing, but it will save more people from being part of the statistic of taking their own lives. They don't just take their own lives because of being at war, and they don't just take their own lives because of the moral injuries or the PTS. They take their lives because in their vulnerability of entering a room and creating trust, they are failed. And that's the one that I'm probably less diplomatic, but I'm old enough now to know that I simply don't care too much.
No, everything you're saying absolutely is you're speaking my language 100%. I'm trying to more recently getting into the conversation around, bringing our warriors home, because there's just that's been one of the things that people reach out to me the most about is, how do we welcome the warrior home? And I encourage them just in the moment, think about the question you just asked me just for a second, even write it down on a piece of paper and just think for a second. What is that implying? Well, it implies that there's something wrong with us. You need to fix whatever's wrong in me. It's your job in some shape or form to intervene, right? And whatever's going to happen, you're going to do it to me, the warrior. What if we just paused and said, well, maybe we're not asking the right question? Because, right, I don't think any of those things to be true now, right? Looking back on my experience and where I am now, I think the right question we need to be asking ourselves and having conversations about in the community is like, how do we become the kind of society that a warrior can come home to, right? Because then it's about transformation, right? Then it's happening alongside society. It's happening alongside community, right? It goes from being in an intervention or a technique to just the ecology of the environment. And like if we can ask the right questions and then look for the conditions that need to be present for a veteran to become whole again, then we're starting to have the right conversation. But if we're always looking to the veterans as they're broken and there's something wrong and they need fixing, I mean, you look across millennia, and that's never how the veteran, the warrior archetype, period, was looked to, right? They came home and they had the time and the space and the moral safety to have the conversations, and the shame was shared and carried amongst everyone because war was close to home and they knew what it was like and they saw it and they felt it and they were thankful that they went and carried that burden so the community didn't have to, right? But the community played a role in all of it. And that's just, I think it's kind of a product of today where we don't even know if the reasons we go to war are the right reasons. And war doesn't, for us in the United States, doesn't happen on our doorstep. So we're like illiterate to what that even means. So to me, it's not really a surprise as to why we receive warriors the way we do. We don't know how to anymore, right? And there's just, it's all about stigma and fixing and pathology, when it's like I came to my therapist and I've got this huge life experience that I'm trying to share, and all they want to do is just give me a medical record number, a prescription, and a bunch of diagnosis codes. It's like my whole life was just distilled to a few digits on a piece of paper. It's like, you think that's helping? You think that's fixing people? But that's the system in place, and that's what they have to use, right? So I think, our therapists and our clinicians are just getting beat up too because the system is broken, right? And the culture is just not set up to receive us anymore. And I think that's a big part of the conversation, not even just around moral injury, but just the reintegration and the transition from military back to civilian life that needs to happen.
Yeah. So in many ways, around these two operational zones. So one is within the therapy room, where
Hmm.
people can be guided to have more authentic and embodied conversations.
Hmm.
And the other one is as they return into the territory they once inhabited and come back into civilian life, where they are met and not failed, and where they don't sit in the darkness of aloneness. And it's like for years, and I think my first book was really about that one, was to train clinicians Like guys would come in my room and I don't go anywhere near the trauma. I just simply say, hey, would you leave a guy behind? Never.
Mm.
So do you think you've left yourself behind? Now they get it. Now we identify our
Yeah.
SOPs, we create an operational battle plan, and our
Mm.
goal is to go back and heal and bring back all the many parts of ourselves because when we combine them, we're much stronger. We look at pull throughs, you know, ADs, explosive bouts of anger. We look at how
Mm.
the and what are the pull throughs in your body. So what are you going to do every day to go from the back of your Humvee to the front of your Humvee? The guys get it. And
Mm.
the greatest gift I found was when the guys would leave the room, they would stand up, they'd say, I love you, brother, big hug, and off they
Hmm.
go.
Yeah.
That is what we want for healing to happen. And you don't have to go to war to do that. You just have to know exactly what you're talking about is the map and the language to make it a profoundly embodied and healing space with modalities that recognize that not everything lies in the brain, but it actually dwells powerfully within the body and the soul.
You need to write some more books.
No, too soon.
That was beautiful.
No, no more. This is last. This last one nearly killed me. So
No,
yeah.
I mean, so well said. Yeah, there's just so much wisdom in that. I don't know what to say.
No, well, I mean the map. Your map is
Yeah.
profound.
Well, thank you.
I wish I'd seen that a long time ago.
Yeah.
But thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Yeah, this is again, like I'm trying to leverage my life experience to have different conversations with clinicians, therapists, just people in the traditional Western system, and it's actually been way more well received than I kind of expected. I thought there's going to be a lot of pushback, and there's definitely some, but this all of this work is entering the academic environment. I've got pilot programs set up. It's IRB validated. So, I mean, we're going to hopefully get this to the point. My goal is for them to at least welcome and open up to an ecosystem of care where clinicians and medicine is there to stabilize, and we are there to bring the veterans home from a peer community-based network of care. And I think that's got to be the paradigm that we move to, because trying to fit soul speak and spiritual and embodied talk into the Western system is just square peg round hole, and we're just going to have to fight the system the whole way. So if we can just agree to a point of care where I know where you need to play a role, and I know where I need to play a role, and then work together with the veteran at the center. That's the hope. That's the hope. And I think having to play the game of moving these different pieces through and gathering data and the IRB pieces. I mean, it's an unfortunate part that I don't really want to have to do, but it's necessary and more well received than I had expected.
Well, I think within your circle of influence, it'll be a light that attracts more and more people.
Yeah.
They will go to where they feel met and where they have the capacity to heal from a compassionate way.
Hmm.
And I think the more that stronger that light grows, the more power it has. It eventually has to create change even within training institutes because there's a
Hmm.
recognition that what we do know now about healing in the body, um, as a result, needs to be brought into how we train both the people in terms of their own development and their own heart opening, and also in terms of if you want to work with a wounded population and wound as in people that have a great doorway into the greatest parts of who they are,
Hmm.
um, things need to change.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Barry. Thank you. I'm so glad that you were on this call. I thought that right when you hopped on, I thought, okay, there's going to be good synergy here also with Scott. And Scott, I will get right to you. What I really just want to share right now after what you just shared, Ryan, is as a civilian, I am so sorry that that we do not understand what veterans are going through. 8 years ago, a veteran shared his story with me. I did not have the words of what I was feeling. But I was so moved thinking this is our duty to be here to support those who sign on that line.
Yeah.
So it's as a civilian, it hurts me that we are not more equipped and more connected. And
Yeah.
that's,
Yeah.
I hope
I,
we,
I I definitely hear that. And I think every veteran will probably echo the same thing is that we sign up so that happens to be the circumstance. I did I did what I did so other people didn't have to, right? The unfortunate part is we don't see that far ahead to realize that now the culture is just not set up to receive us. Like I have no problem. Like I can look back and say I would do it again. Like because I wouldn't want my brother, anyone to have have participated or witnessed what I had to witness. You included, right? So I think what our intent is to almost create this scenario that we now suffer from, which is again, it's just another paradox. Maybe it's not a paradox, but it's a problem, right? Because we've got it so good now that like I'm so happy that you don't have to understand what that's like. But I think what we can do is just start to have the conversations around um, getting people to to just understand the experience without having to experience it, I guess. I don't have better words for it in the moment, but um, it's why we joined was to create the fact that we have to now deal with the fact that we don't know how to bring veterans home.
You are protective humans. You are humans
Yeah.
that are very protective and that you signed on that line. And once I heard that first veteran story,
Hmm.
I had he and his wife come over to our house to share his story because I thought, oh my gosh, we need other civilians to hear this. And I invited veterans and civilians. The civilians all came.
Mm-hmm.
Veterans who came were clinicians.
Yeah.
But the other veterans maybe weren't quite ready or comfortable with that. But you know, given the opportunity, a lot of civilians really felt it and responded just like I did.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I
Yeah. I find that to be true almost always.
yes, it's just kind of getting the voices out, getting the power of your story out
Yeah.
there. So I really appreciate you sharing that, but it did really make me feel like, again, I just want to say as a civilian, I'm so sorry that there's so much more that's not understood more, because I
Yeah.
think we could be so much better for our warriors if there's more of a connection. So hopefully, you know, these
That
voices.
is that is received. I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm just curious, one last thing. As you share your talk with all this that you've worked through, getting the language, all this 20 years of you um, processing all this,
Hmm.
when in your journey do you feel like you could have heard this? When, like,
Oh, that's a good question. That's a good question. Um, well, I mean, delivered in the way that I did it today, I guess it depends. I Well, maybe I can just answer from those that I guess veterans who have been in multiple different points in that cascade process that I was describing. Again, I've not got this to the point where like I can pinpoint where somebody's at, but I can say generally, um, I can be pretty close with identifying. Um, just if they were to hear the language that I was using as far as expressing the lived experience. Again, combat or not, I think a lot of it just resonates. I think it's like you know, this moral injury is like a relational wound, right? It happens in a community. So you know, they don't even have to directly experience it to recognize it. But I think you know, just resonating with the lived experience of what I was describing, I would be very surprised if people at almost any stage of that weren't able to get something where they were like, okay, there's something there. The challenge that I found was there was just, and again, like I went nearly, I'm not exaggerating when I say I went 17 years without a therapist doubling down on asking me why I say like my life has no meaning or I feel like I have no purpose or I don't know who I am. I don't recognize myself. I can't connect with anybody. Like I was dropping like as many, you know, signs as humanly possible and it wasn't recognized. I think just for so long, we've just gone without a language and without a mental model to conceptualize this in. So I think that's the battle we have, is like we can get this to more people and they can recognize themselves in it, but we need to be very thoughtful around the language. For me, when I first heard the word soul wound, that's what caught me. I don't know why. Well, I mean, I do know why now, looking in the rear view, but in the moment, I didn't know why it caught me. But I was in the room having another group therapy at another place. I probably zoned out after 10 minutes of listening to people. Just you hear the same stories over and over and over, and even I zone out at some point. But when I heard somebody say soul wound, it's like I snapped back into the room. So like for me, it was that word. But I think we've just got to be looking for those thoughtful pieces of language that will grab somebody's attention where they're like, that's what I was trying to express and I didn't have the words for.
Yeah.
Because when we can figure that out, that's when we can catch people at all different points in that continuum. So I'm trying to develop that lexicon and get that out there so that we can just have more conversations and use these words that seem to trigger a response. Um, that's how I think we're going to capture more people, by just having more conversation and me doing more of this and learning what grabs people where they're like, I see myself reflected in that. That's what I'm that's what I'm trying to do and hoping to do.
That makes perfect sense. And then what else is coming up in me is knowing really great, powerful questions that can gently open that door.
Mm,
Um,
yeah.
that container, that safe container, the freedom to be able to somehow connect to that whole world of soul wounds and exploring that in a way to heal. And it's beyond me, but I appreciate the conversation. Yeah,
Yeah.
I just want to be wherever I can help with this.
Hmm.
But yeah, thank you. So beautifully shared. I appreciate that. Thank you. And then what
You're
you
very welcome.
did too, Barry, that was really powerful. And then
Mhm.
Scott, thank you so much for being patient.
No, not at all. I mean, you're always so gracious, Sarah. So that's always appreciated. Thank you. Yeah, talking about Barry, what you said, Ryan, and there's often times when Barry's done talking that I'm just blown away because of he is so thoughtful, and he expresses himself very well. Now, I'm not going to
Mhm.
say anything about him having an accent. I wouldn't do that, but uh,
It adds to it.
it's part of it, right? It's
Yeah.
I get sucked in every time. But no, we've been doing this together. The Veterans in Conversation, the podcast that we're doing for about a year now. That time has flown by, but his insights are just incredible. So
Mm.
I feel like the younger brother in the equation. So I'm always listening and taking copious notes when he talks. You mentioned words, right? Words mean things, right? How many times did we hear that in the Marine Corps?
Yeah.
I know I heard that a lot, and uh, when we frame veterans as being disabled, I do not like that, right? I don't like that term disabled veteran
Hmm.
because it puts everyone in the same mindset. Oh, this person's fractured,
Yeah.
no matter what. That's just the first thing they think of. Oh, you
Hmm.
served? Oh, geez, So there's a negative connotation there that I think someone needs to change that, whoever that person or people are, which is part
Yeah.
of what you're doing here, right? Trying to change words and how people perceive and think. So, yeah, I absolutely agree with that. The other couple things here, you know, I remember when we were floating over to Iraq. Not everyone knew at that time that that's what we were going to be doing because it was still
Hmm.
hush hush. And I remember seeing my family on the pier, waving goodbye to them, and then going out in San Diego, going around the turn out in the ocean, thinking, this might be the last time
Hmm.
I'm seeing this, you know, and it weighed heavy on me that in that instance. And then, you just get busy with what you do. But I absolutely felt the same thing, hey, if I don't come back, I'm fine with that because I don't want other folks to have to get involved with this. Of course, we didn't know that this would stretch out to 20 some years either, right? That
Right.
was a whole nother thing. But you're right. I mean, I felt that was my just part of my justification, and and I'm okay with that. And then fast forwarding, I think personally, I think I've done well with, my time after service, with, how I manage things. And I'm very blessed with that, by the way. But I view the war in Iraq very differently now than I did 20 years ago, 23 years ago, because, we find out more about things and then, uh, and not getting into the politics of it, but
Hmm.
it's infuriating, right? When
Hmm.
you find out stuff and then, that rearview mirror and
Hmm.
you can't drive looking through the rearview mirror the entire time, right? So that's an impact. But then for me, what I think what's affected me in maybe a greater way is how we ended in Afghanistan. A lot of folks
Mm.
are happy about that, right? Folks who served. And that for me, that's the betrayal part is,
Yeah.
that could have and should have ended very differently. And again, not getting into the politics, but getting into, who was in charge of the military, who were the senior officers, and why didn't they do what they should have done? I can't imagine some of the guys we had in the Second World War doing that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So how that ended really really bothers me. And I know a lot of folks as well
Hmm.
who are struggling with this. Um, yeah, so I think that's probably enough said with that. But
Yeah, I think I mean, it can be a form of collective moral injury. Absolutely.
yes,
Right?
yeah,
Like that is a deep, deep betrayal. Because you think of, I guess I don't want to project on you, but what I hear from most people, most veterans is like now you're asking why. Why did we lose all those lives and do all of that just to leave in that way, right?
right,
That level of betrayal can absolutely produce again some of the signs and cascading effects that I'm speaking to today. I mean, I've definitely seen people um, show from the just with that level of discussion, right? Whether it was people learning about why we were in Iraq, and obviously not getting into the politics, but um,
right,
definitely see people show up with that, the meaning making and the purpose and all of the same challenges.
right. Yeah, I'm very proud of the Marines that I was with in the unit that I was with.
Hmm.
Folks did a tremendous job. Everyone did exactly what they were supposed to be doing. And
Hmm.
when something wasn't quite right, they improvised, they adapted, they overcame, the slogan,
Hmm.
and they absolutely did. The Marines and sailors just amazed me and my boss with just how stellar they were. And
Yeah.
then you step away from that and you think, man, you know, things could have really been different, but they weren't.
Hmm.
We
Hmm.
trained hard and we executed as we trained. And that's something that I will always hold dear, right
Yeah.
here as a Marine, because I believe that we did it right.
Hmm.
Uh, but again, walking away from it and seeing the larger scale, there's a lot that could have been done differently and wasn't,
Yeah.
and it was wrong.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's difficult. And I like the way that you frame the collective piece with that on the moral injury.
Yeah.
So, I
Yeah.
think that's a smart way to look at that. Yeah,
Yep. Yeah.
yeah,
Appreciate
thank
that.
you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah. And I think, what we find when we're starting to go back through that restoration process, is, this kind of gets a bit philosophical, and sometimes you have to sit with it for a little bit, but like meaning is not individually prescribed, right? It is a collective act, right? It's not when one person thinks this is what the meaning is in that, like that's your perspective. But when it touches the collective as far as meaning, that's when something has, prescribed meaning to it. So like going back through that process again, just moral injury is such a relational wound that it requires that community container. And that's why, the individual therapy sessions, just they're not going to touch the wound, right? Because they're
Right,
they're they're not capable of restoring that architecture that eroded and eventually collapsed.
Amen. And then I guess the last thing I'll say, it just popped in my mind while you were talking is, the accountability piece. I think that would
Mhm.
help.
Yeah,
In
always.
some measure, I think the accountability would be a huge step in the right direction.
It
We'll
would,
see.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that would definitely help the moral injury, right? The
Mhm.
accountability. So powerful. Thank you so much. Um, Sabine.
Yeah, thanks a lot for sharing. What comes to me is, first of all, I want to point out, Sarah, that it is not a failure that a civilian may not understand what it is, because a moral wound or an moral injury wound is something you must feel, and something you go through and experience it. And this is in normal life, it doesn't happen. And this is why so many people didn't know about this concept. And this is not a personal failure. It's just they did not know about it. And you can't study it in university. And this is maybe the reason why most of the clinicians didn't know about that and can't manage that. They prescribe pills and things like that, but they didn't come close to it. And I think that's a very, very important thing to know. Yes, my journey was I'm third generation participant, and I want to shed light of the transgenerational aspect of the wound, because if you don't process it and come to terms with this wound, it moves to the next generation. This is what I experience, and also the death doesn't make the wound disappear. This is what I experience, and I'm an example for that, because Germans were the perpetrators in the war, in the Second World War. They did all the horrible things. And most of the Germans, all of the Germans didn't process their wounds, because their moral wounds, because they failed so deep that it is not was not an option to face that, because it was so heavy guilt that I think that Dan Baron, for example, said that there's a legacy of silence, and they didn't talk about it. They came home from the war, they were broken. And of course, they did horrible things and experienced horrible things. And this is what was not possible to process. They didn't have help in this time too. And on the other side, there's a huge amount of victims they produced. And this is so heavy and so huge and such a big guilt that it is not possible to process in the current generation. And the children of these soldiers, and also of the perpetrators of the Nazi regime, tried to process some of this wound, but they didn't manage, and most of them failed, because of course they had no help. They were accused to do all the bad things in this war, which was right. And this is much heavier to process that when you were part of a very evil thing. And I think this is also maybe a facet of this problem that we have to face. Yes, and I'm a grandchild. My grandfather was not a Nazi, but he was forced into the war as a soldier, as a regular soldier. But of course, he was part of horrible things. I'm sure that he does not want that, because I know the story of my grandfather, but he was forced to do it, and that caused so much damage inside him that he was not able to take part in normal life anymore. and he died shortly after the end of the war because I think because of that, because he could not manage that. And this is what I want to point out. If this is why this work is so very important. If you can't process that, it will pass through the generations. And I think in Germany, most of the people avoid the wound and they deny it, and they make silence about it, and they don't want to talk about it, and they have wounds they never knew that they had them. And so it was with me. I was not aware that I had a wound, because I am a civilian and it's third generation. But what I sensed always inside me was a deep form of depression, which was there, always there, and I couldn't make sense of it. It was depression, and wow, I can't explain it. As you said, I had no words for that. And this is what makes me seeking what can help, and what did I miss, and what can I figure out? What is the reason for that depression? And yes, and that is the story when I come to terms with the TRT groups, to reflect and trust groups. And then that happens, that something deep inside breaks through. And this was very changing and blowing my mind. And this was the exchange and the acknowledgement. For example, the most moving thing was that an Israeli professor came to Germany and asked what was wrong in your families, what went wrong in your families, and that no one else before had was so brave to ask such a question. And this was so very moving that I think, yes, when such a person, such a man is able to ask such a question, that is so brave and so impressive, that I think, well, he does not operate with guilt. He just wants to know what happens in the families. And this is very, very deep. And I think this is in very short terms now. That is the task we are in now, that we are witnesses of such processes, and we can be teachers, we can be healers, and we can be persons who can understand these wounds. And this is so very important. It is a new task, and it's a new life, and it makes much with our values inside. And this is what I want to share with you in short terms.
Yeah, no, so beautifully said, Sabine. Like I said, it's not something that's come up a tremendous amount in the work that I've done in the community thus far. But obviously, we're talking about generational, right? So what you're living through now is what our grandchildren, our great grandchildren, will live through in the future. And while I haven't seen it or spoken, haven't had much conversation around it as it pertains to moral injury specifically, but more largely just talking about trauma, that's something that absolutely needs more conversation, because I do agree with everything you're saying, that and that's why also I feel like that embodied and that metabolizing of those accumulated materials of rage, shame, guilt, all of those things, if that doesn't occur, psychologically you can be sound, but you're eroding on the inside, and that energy is going to pass, right? And we do see it in other, ways, shapes, and forms around passing generationally. Absolutely see that. Haven't encountered it as much in my work, but again, I do believe that when we look into these future generations, they're going to be reflective of the process that you're speaking to today. And I think you have a lot of wisdom that you can share now, to hopefully help us avoid that.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you,
Thank
Ryan.
you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Hey, I'd like to say something here, if I may. It's so easy for us to sit, 80 years down the
Yeah.
road from what happened in the Second World War and to look at it with the eyes that we have today, because a lot of things changed in how war is fought, right?
Hmm.
And you look at what happened with the Germans, you know, probably like Sabine's grandfather, some young guy is conscripted into the military and he's out on the front lines or whatever
Hmm.
his function is in the military. You know, there was a lot of folks that absolutely were not involved in the things that the Nazis were
Hmm.
doing, right? They were just a cog in the wheel and they were just trying to survive day by day. That was a hell of a, and that war was terrible. No, there's no good war, I guess is the
Right.
way to say that. But, you know, so it's easy for folks to sit back and be so critical of just how messed up the German people were. Yeah, some were, but certainly not all. And so the forgiveness that needs to come with that, I think folks need to remember that
Hmm.
what are we going to do when we're putting in difficult times? Are we going to be the ones
Yeah.
that step up and do what's right, or maybe not even know that things are
Yeah.
happening until later, right? So
Yeah.
there's some things to think about there, and that's always bothered me. It's just like when you hear that term Nazi today, a lot of the folks that throw that label around have no concept of what they're
Hmm.
saying.
Hmm.
Because if they
Yeah.
did, they would probably not use that word as easily as it's thrown out nowadays.
Yeah. Yeah. And something that Sabine said, I think is just so critical. It probably even may have glanced by. It almost glanced by me is when she spoke to that Israeli therapist coming, and what changed it all was just somebody asking a different question.
Mm.
And I think that's what we're up against. Not the only thing. There's obviously a lot of complexity, but when I look at the veteran suicide crisis, I think what this offers us, this if this concept of moral injury proves to be showing itself through this cascade and restoration process, I think what we can say is that, the classically we think around suicide as we have an acute scenario, it's due to pain, right? And it's emotional, right? But more than anything, it's acute and it's a decision to not be in pain anymore, whether that's psychological pain, emotional pain, physical pain. It under that in that lens, it's an escape. For me, this suicide was not due to acute pain. It was not even emotional. It was a rational decision that said it my life had no purpose, it had no meaning, and I could connect with no one. It was why? Why be here? Why not just check out? It wasn't emotional. It didn't feel bad about it. I think we're missing something because I know I'm not the only one. I think we have a real problem with having no meaning, no purpose, no connection. I think this identity wound, there's really something there that's driving suicide because it's the only thing I can think of when we're doing everything we possibly can think of. To me, it's always, are we asking the right question? And what she said kind of brought that back around. And I don't think we're asking the right question. And we're looking at suicide as an acute pain reaction when it's truly just this slow degradation of identity over time that's resulting in people having no reason to be here.
Mm. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, very complex, isn't it? I mean, there's just so much into this, so many lessons learned in history, and yet don't we want all humans to be able to process whatever
Yeah.
they've been through to have a chance to heal, to make amends with themselves or whatever they need to heal with, or so I really wish the best for those generational wounds. Wasn't it Richard Rohr who said something like, if we don't deal with the trauma, we're bound to transmit it? And it just
Yeah.
sounds like, yeah, the German people never really had that container that Ryan talks about to have that processing time. And Well, listen, I really appreciate everybody sharing so much. I'd love to end with Holly today and then
Mhm.
circle back to you, Ryan, to just have you share what you want us to walk away with today. So,
Sure.
Holly, why don't you end us out? Good to see you.
It's so good to be here, and I'll make mine very short,
Mhm.
very brief. I do want to say, oh my gosh, Sabine, you really struck me about the generational, and I can see that in my family. Never thought about what I see in my sister, who was the closest to my dad, but boy,
Mhm.
is it there, and in the her kids, my nephews, I see it so strongly, and I don't know personally where I'd be if I hadn't had Danny and all that God brought into my life through healing from Danny, and his sacrifices changed me so much. So, but I think it's a huge thing for us to look into, boy. And the one thing that I just wanted to share and say, Ryan, you made the comment besides the wrong question about what you were talking about now, but earlier when you said when we want to know how do we bring our warriors back, that's the wrong question, because what that's something that really hit me back in 2019 when we were
Mhm.
still in Afghanistan, clearly. And when I would talk about it, I'll never forget how many people would stop me and go, "Are we still over there?" When you talked about how we're not close, there's just our country. Yes, I know you guys are, you went in there, so we won't have to, or you signed up, and my Danny signed up so that so many of us don't have to suffer. But our country doesn't have in general, our civilians, we just don't even know what's going on. And I'm not saying I've got this great solution, but everyone here already knows the big one is we need to talk. Your stories need to get out there. Um, our country needs to know and hear from that less than 1% what is going on. Our country will never understand, even remotely, until more people start talking and telling their stories. So I just really appreciate that,
Mhm.
this whole platform, and Sabine, yours come in as a whole nother level.
Mhm.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Holly. And I think that is it is really painful, I think, for
Mhm.
civilians to realize how detached we have been from your service. That is not in any way trying to I don't ever want that to come across like pity at all, because you guys are you're warriors, but it is it's really painful, I think, to realize our lack of a part in being on the backside with you. That's
Yeah.
what I was trying to share. And Holly, thank you so much for bringing that up. And I think especially as a Gold Star mother, I can't imagine how deeply that hits too. Like, please understand, what people are doing for this country. Understand the sacrifice. Understand what it means for somebody to actually write sign their name on that line.
Mhm.
So yes, so we are all in this together trying to get that
Mhm.
message out. Thank you so much for this incredible conversation. All of you have contributed so beautifully. Ryan, what do you want us to leave with today?
Yeah, so much. Well, I mean, first, I mean, to you, I think this work here, right? This is essential. Um, just the witnessing, the listening, the creating the container. I mean, this work is sacred, right? Don't ever undervalue or underestimate what you're doing here and everybody that's involved here. We have to keep containers like this going. Like it's just essential. Yeah, it's where the healing is going to occur. But yeah, just around the invisible wounds, I think these just obviously a special moral injury because of the fact that I feel like it's not spoken about enough and it's such an epidemic. But these individual wounds are killing us, but they don't have to. We've got to ask better questions. We've got to get better at listening. We've got to create the space for community. I think we've got to build literacy back into our communities around the veteran experience and how to create the conditions for them to come home. But this just is something we have to do together, right? And it's not just about saving lives. There are so many who don't choose to end their life, but live hollow lives all the way through, right? That feeling of no meaning, no purpose, no connection, the emotion is just not there. That lived experience is just not there, but they'll tooth and nail to the grave, right? So I think it's also important not just this isn't just about saving lives, it's making lives that are worth living again. And just a critical part. And we have an opportunity to, it almost seems overused, but turning wounds into wisdom. But truly, when you can play a part in that and see that happen, and see people's growth and evolution, it's the most important thing that we can be doing. And I think, something we didn't talk about today very much, but is a strategy that I'm looking towards trying to cultivate more is as we need to establish these elders who have been through it, who have the language, who have the understanding, to help guide these generations through this process. Those are the healers we desperately need right now. We've got amazing clinicians. They've got state-of-the-art tools. We'll debate all day long around the effectiveness of the gold standard evidence-based approaches, but there's something there. There's language there. There's frameworks there. It's less about creating something new. I think there's so much that has been put in place, generations and civilizations for eons have put in place that we can just remember and draw wisdom from. And when we can combine all that together, I think we really have the opportunity to change this and just enter into a whole new paradigm. Um, that's what I'm here for.
Mhm. Very beautifully shared. Thank you so much, Ryan. You have just been gold, and
Well,
you
thank
have
you.
our family here. You really do, and
Yeah, I feel it.
we definitely want to stay connected.
Yeah,
All of us, and I look forward to hearing you talk with Scott and Barry. That's going to be another amazing conversation.
yeah.
So anyway,
Looking forward to it.
thanks again.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.